今日は木曜日。9月2日でございますね。はい。今日のテーマは、COVID インフルエンザ時代ですから、この、ストレスの高い人が増えてるんじゃないかなと思うんですよ。で、ストレスっていうのはいろんなストレスがありますから、例えば、behavioral ストレスは、例えば you can't sleep, outbursts of anger, and there's psychological stress, forgetfulness, disorientation, confusion. And then there's social stress, blaming, criticizing, impatience with others. These are different types of stress, and they all require a different approach, I believe. So, what I'd like to talk about tonight are the physical manifestations of stress and how to deal with them, and what happens if you don't. So, first of all, I think it's important to point out that there is positive stress, a little bit, that gets you motivated, that kind of gets you up in the morning to face the day. In the era of COVID, sometimes that's substantial. So a little bit of stress is not necessarily a bad idea. Too much stress, on the other hand, will have serious health ramifications. And I think you should all be aware, if you're not, of how that happens, why that happens, and how to alleviate the more serious afflictions that result from that. So let's start out for the people who are scientifically oriented. What happens when you are in a situation where you feel, well, let's face it, fear? Apprehension is one thing, but when that elevates into a fear type of fear for your life, fear for things that affect your life, your economic situation, your professional situation, these all manifest the same way. And it's called the fight or flight response. So what happens, the amygdala, which is part of the brain that senses this, sends a message to another part of the brain, the hypothalamus, which is in direct proximation. And the hypothalamus triggers the sympathetic nervous system. And also within the sympathetic nervous system is the parasympathetic nervous system. And that sends a message to the adrenal glands, and epinephrine, or adrenaline, as we understand it, stimulates the body to do certain things to prepare you to either combat this situation or to flee from that situation. So that's kind of the science aside. That's kind of a general knowledge that I think we all have. We all understand that when we enter a situation or about to enter a situation, we all understand that feeling in the pit of your stomach where you get this apprehension and then you start to really feel bad. There are all kinds of aspects. It says if it's long term, but a little bit of stress, but too much and it's long term, these same effects manifest themselves. In athletics, certain sports require a great deal of aggression, and that's okay. But too much aggression and performance is diminished. So coaches will coach their charges and get them worked up and stimulated. I'm sure you've seen this on television. People get a lot excited and they work up and they get that adrenaline going. I was a power lifter for years, and there was kind of a self-motivation process that I went through to really kind of motivate myself to lift very, very heavy weights. Some people went to a really, real extreme, butting their head against the bar until it bled, just all over the top kind of thing. And everybody has a different approach, especially sports figures, to how to get themselves motivated to willfully impose stress on themselves to get their body functions kind of more attuned to the conflict or the participation they're about to embark upon. So here you go. You've got you're encountering a stressful situation. Now it can be anything. There are low levels of stress, like I just mentioned, but the high levels, things that really make you afraid. You're running out of money. You can't do it. So what do? You got bills to pay. You got people that depend on you. So gradually that escalates unless you do something about it. The fight or flight response causes the body to prepare. And on one aspect, it's a very positive thing. Thousands of years ago, when we were all hunters and gatherers, if you will, our hunting procedure came up against animals, and we had to protect ourselves and other dangerous entities in our environment. So the brain senses stress, senses the fear, and prepares you. So it prepares you in a couple of different ways. And this depends on the individual, and more importantly, that individual's level of experience. If you've experienced the same kind of financial problems, but you've gotten over it, when you encounter those problems again, I know about that. I can take care of that. That's you kind of self-assurance sets in. So that's all well and good. But if it's a new situation, something you have never encountered before, stress levels increase proportionally. So what happens? Immediately, I'm sure you've all experienced, your heart rate goes up. So your pulse rate goes up. You start picking up. Your resting pulse rate goes very, very high. Normal resting pulse is around, for men, 70, for women, 80. It can go very, very high depending on the perceived level of stress, sometimes 120, 130. Now, just that alone can be dangerous. If your heart is not conditioned to that level of increased heart rate, that alone can cause the heart to fail. So, which is why, getting back to the main focus of this little talk, why exercise is so important. So if you know you're going to encounter a stressful situation, preparation helps. And one of the ways to prepare is to condition the body to accept the manifestations of stress. And so the first one we talk about is heart rate. So if your resting heart rate is 90 and you encounter a stressful situation and 90 hits like 120, 130, 140, and then your heart fails, well, that's not necessarily a good thing. But if your resting heart rate is like 60 or 50, lower than that, then your heart is accustomed to a certain burden. And that allows you to successfully get through the stressful period. So what else happens? Well, the heart rate increases because the heart wants to pump more oxygen and more nutrition to the muscles where it's required to either combat the situation, physical combat, or to flee, to run from that physical entity. Simple, right? You either run away or you beat the bear to death and you're all right. Well, in order for the heart to get that nutrition and oxygen to the muscles where it's needed, it has to have a driver, and the driver is blood pressure. So the hypothalamus controls that, and so gets the signals for the amygdala and says, okay, we're entering a stressful situation. Okay, let's pick up the heart rate and we'll pick up blood pressure. So blood pressure drives the blood to the muscles, and the muscles get the needed nutrients and oxygen in order to function more efficiently. So that's all logical, right? Except if you're not conditioned to your blood pressure rising to a certain level. And then what happens is, well, cardiovascular afflictions, accidents. It could be in the brain. It could be a cerebral hemorrhage. It could be a heart attack. These kinds of things. So again, we get back to how do you prepare for that? Well, you strengthen the veins and arteries and the cardiovascular system by exercise. which is one of the key remedies, I should say precautions, when you feel that you're going to, eventually we are going to some stressful situation. So there you have the base. Well, beyond that, what else happens? Well, so the body has become more efficient already. Okay, so blood vessels distend to allow more blood to be accepted by the muscles. Blood pressure is pushing nutrition and basically sugar in the blood to the muscles and oxygen to the muscles. So that's all good. So we've taken care of how to stimulate the muscles to action. Well, there's another process, and that's by the parasympathetic nervous system, and that diminishes certain things. So it relieves the body of the burden that it's carrying. So the body is in the process of becoming very, very streamlined. So you've seen it in movies. People become very, very afraid, and they urinate. And that's because the body says, okay, we've got this urine in the bladder. It's a burden. The body can't run as fast or fight as efficiently with the burden. So we're going to get rid of that. And it's really sometimes not under your control. So that happens. So you begin to urinate frequently to get rid of the burden. You also, diarrhea is very common in high stress situations. I can attest to that. When I was competing in judo, 3 days before a contest, I would begin with diarrhea. It was very, very stressful for me because a lot depended on the outcome of the particular contest. So the consequence, that was the consequence. Some people are paralyzed by this level of apprehension. I wasn't paralyzed, but I certainly had some discomfort. So the bowel is evacuated and the bladder is evacuated. So then, well, what about the food that hasn't digested in your system? So the hypothalamus recognizes that, okay, well, the food is a burden. We have to digest that food for a couple of reasons. Number one, we have to digest the food so it's not a burden, a physical burden. The weight of the food is a burden. It also needs to digest that and assimilate that food as much as possible to supply the sugar and nutrients that is needed to fuel the muscles. So that occurs. So acidic reaction in the intestine elevates radically. So there you have it. Not a problem, really. If, as we did several hundred or several thousand years ago, if the stressful situation is physical in nature, meaning if there's a beast or an enemy that requires physical action to overcome the cause of the stress, that's okay. And that's what the body is preparing us for. And this is all hormonal. So we don't really have a lot of control over this. This is what's going to happen. Adrenaline is going to secrete. It's going to cause the muscles to contract and to react more effectively. I know many of you have probably heard about a housewife whose child is in danger, walks into a room, a burning house, and picks up a grand piano, who none of us can lift, and rescues her child and leaves. Well, with no secondary effects, no muscle soreness the next day, anything. So one of the things that adrenaline does is it causes synapses, nervous synapses, to open up and fully receive electricity from the brain that stimulates muscle contraction. So that's probably an extreme that many of us may not even be capable of, but I'm sure all of you have heard stories like this. So that's what's happened. Electrical response, electricity is generated by the brain, goes to the nervous system. Those synapses open up wide, muscular activity is stimulated to a significant degree and allows the person to perform superhuman feats, if you will. Powerlifters do this, and it's volitional. The reason that they do these extreme, and what I did extreme, was to voluntarily, as much as possible, stimulate opening those nervous synapses so muscular traction is elevated. Not easy. And I'm not saying it happens to everybody, but I thought that I was able to increase my contractile capacity by 10-20% by concentrating on this particular imaging. One of the reasons why imaging in sports is so important with professional athletes now. You imagine yourself in a situation and performance is enhanced. So, what happens if you don't move? Well, that's the problem, because many of us cannot move. The stressful situation manifests itself, the fight or flight response sets in, and we don't do anything. We can't. If it's a professional situation or something like the COVID virus, where you are prevented from any physical action, which is true and not true. If you think about it, you could probably do something. But it's one of the reasons why movement is so important. If you have all these responses, if your heart rate increases and sweating increases to, if sweat evaporates, it cools the body because muscles ostensibly are going to start to move. They're going to create heat, and you're going to want to alleviate that heat. So all of these things, increased heart rate, increased blood pressure, sweating, evacuation of the bowel, evacuation of the bladder, distension of the muscles, acidic response in the gut. All of these things occur. And if you don't do them, all of that just sits there. So your heart rate increases, but there's no compensatory movement to lower that pulse rate, to distend those blood vessels even more. Because when you exercise, blood vessels distend to allow oxygen more efficiently distributed to the muscles. And then blood pressure rises. Well, if you do nothing, again, if you distend the capillary beds and the veins and arteries, which is a pretty extreme level of exercise, blood pressure will go down. I've seen this with hypertensive clients. They say, well, exercise increases blood pressure only initially. And if you're careful, long term, it will lower blood pressure. And if you create a mass, if you will, systems of capillary beds, then that will compensate for blood pressure when the blood pressure rises. So you wind up with potentially heart attacks, hypertensive. So again, veins and arteries can rupture under extreme situations. Blood sugar rises, so a precursor to diabetes. Acidic response in the gut leads to serious intestinal difficulties, ulcers, bladder infections, irritations, those kinds of things. So, and those are the physical manifestations of not doing anything about the causative factors of stress. Sometimes there's nothing you can do about them. They just occur, the body responds. So what are we to do? Well, as I mentioned before, you precondition the body to accept certain levels of stress. And the better condition you are, the better your body is able to deal with stress. If you experience a high level of stress, what is the best thing you can do? Well, the best exercise to alleviate stress is walking. And the reason is because weight training, aerobic exercise is fine. If you've done a precautionary time period of developing the cardiovascular system. If you haven't, and you're experiencing stress, scientists tell us that walking seems to be the best. One of the reasons, because it eliminates the competitive aspect of sports, of athletic, of exercise. You may not think that working out at a gym is competitive, but in many cases you compete against yourself. And that doesn't necessarily lower blood pressure. So if you're experiencing these things, the best thing you can do is take a walk, as simple as that sounds. 20 or 30 minutes walking. Again, it's getting a little bit cooler now, so that's not a problem. Walking at a relatively high rate, not high, 4 to 6 kilometers per hour is a recommended pace for walking. But even a stroll will be beneficial. So that will take care, well, it won't take care of, but it will certainly alleviate the extremes of the stress that you're experiencing. Other things, more passive approaches, yoga is extremely good in having you calm down and remove the negative aspects of your environment, the stresses, the people that you associate with, the work that you do, even in a class, if you practice social distancing, those classes are opening up, and if you that can be very beneficial. We're lapsing over here into different types of stress. Social interaction, if you're really stressed out, social stress will dictate that you don't want to do, you don't want to socially interact. But again, that's not what we're discussing tonight, just the physical aspects. So if you want to alleviate your current physical situation that would open you up for the negative aspects of stress, exercise is your best aspect. Ruthie and Hiroko-san, good evening. Don't worry, I'm glad you could tune in. So what do you do to prepare yourself for the eventuality of experiencing a stressful situation? Well, aerobic exercise is the exercise regimen of choice. So what level of exercise should you do? Let me give you what hypertensive patients and what people with high resting blood sugar, diabetic, pre-diabetic patients, their exercise prescription. We talked about this a little bit in previous episodes, primarily I think on the Japanese Kenko Dojo series. You have a maximum pulse rate, and that is 220 minus your age. So for all of you who don't do math very well, if you're 50 years old, your maximum pulse rate is 170. Okay. And you take a percentage of that. Now, the problem with exercise is all exercise potentially, depending on the level, raise blood pressure, but only initially. So you have to be cautious. So you start out with 10 to 15 minutes of very, very low. So you take half of your age-related maximum heart rate. So again, go back to the 50-year-old example, 170. Your pulse rate, check in your pulse rate at 85. And if you're out of shape, usually 85 is your resting pulse rate, but that's okay. So you start out very, very slow. And as you proceed through the aerobic exercise, capillary beds will expand, blood vessels will expand. And then initially your blood pressure probably will rise. If the blood pressure didn't rise a little bit, the capillary beds would not feel the necessity to expand or develop. So, but after a while, after say 10 or 15 minutes, your blood pressure will drop, and it'll drop to a normal range. Now, normal range is, optimum range is 120 over 80, but you have some leeway there. 130 over 90, I think, is the high range now, and 110 over 60, I believe, is the low range. So kind of right in the middle is what you should. And before you exercise, you should check your pulse rate and check your blood pressure. Seems like the printer is going crazy here, so there's a little bit of noise in the background. Please bear with me for a few minutes. So as you continue with the exercise program, again, if you're pre-hypertensive or pre-diabetic, you need to continue for about 30 to 40 minutes, and ideally on a daily basis. I know that seems like a lot, but again, you're not doing it at a very high intensity, and that shouldn't be a problem to maintain about 60 or 70% of your age-related maximum heart rate. So again, going back to our 50-year-old, 220 is the maximum heart rate of anybody. Minus 50 is 170. So 50% is 85. 60% is 97, around 100. And if you maintain that for 30 minutes, capillary beds will distend. And that will serve as a preventive course of action to prevent the onset of high blood pressure. If you enter a stressful situation, that will be a tremendous benefit to you. And that alone. Weight training is another story. Weight training tends to raise blood pressure without the compensatory aspects that aerobic exercise does. So I would, if you have high blood pressure, or if you encounter a stressful situation on a regular basis, unless you're in excellent condition and you have experience, stick with a minimum of 30 minutes on a bicycle, recumbent bicycle, whatever, at 60% of your age-related maximum heart rate. So that's how you do it to compensate for these naturally occurring responses that your body and your hormones dictate to you. Again, it's a sympathetic nervous system. You can't do anything about it. If you encounter a stressful situation, these things will occur. Your blood pressure will rise. Your heart rate will rise. You will begin to sweat. In extreme situations, your bowel and your bladder will evacuate. You will develop intestinal problems, ulcers. So each one has a different type of solution. Just as an aside, if you have intestinal difficulties, ulcers, for example, which is kind of a response to low-level stress, yogurt does a great tool to alleviate the onset of ulcers. There are a lot of dietary concerns that we're not going to cover tonight, but pay attention to your diet. Stressful situations are something that you really can't avoid. They will occur. And unfortunately, the more responsible a person you are, the more this response will manifest itself. If you are more of a happy-go-lucky and you don't let these things bother you, then more power to you. More power to you. It's unfortunate. People in positions of responsibility have a great deal of difficulty with dealing with the fight or flight response. But to summarize, basically, physical stress will manifest in the body preparing you for action. The simple solution is to act. Do some kind of physical endeavor. It doesn't have to be intense, but it has to be relatively long, say 20 or 30 minutes. And try and eliminate these things from your consciousness. It's not easy to do. Try not to think about these things. One other suggestion. We're all assaulted by the media whether it's this type of media, Facebook, Instagram, whatever. And of course, television, radio. Are these newspapers still around? Try not to be concerned about things that you have absolutely no control over. Again, this is, it's a different type of stress, but it will manifest in these physical difficulties. So in the area of fitness, most fitness professionals recommend that you do 1 day a week with no input whatsoever. You don't watch television, you don't watch the news, you don't turn on your computer, you don't listen to feedback, you don't watch Facebook, Instagram, you don't pay attention to it. You need a rest. You need a rest. And that's a very good idea. Once a week is a great idea. Long-term stress is especially harmful because you feel that you can overcome it. But again, like I said, these are hormonal driven responses. So no, you cannot, you can't get away from it. You just have to deal with it, or you have to prepare for it. Sometimes the effects of stress are delayed. This delayed onset stress situation that people coming back from a war situation, these things manifest themselves months and years later. I can give you a real life example. 2 days ago, I had a motorcycle accident. Not serious. Few stitches, few scratches, whatever. Not serious kind of thing. And it was okay. I was almost ready to walk away from the accident, and I found that it required more attention than I was willing to give it. Anyway, so that's all right. I went home and I kind of relaxed, kind of thing. It was a little bit uncomfortable, but not so bad. And the next day, did a full day of work. Well, then we come fast forward to today, and I really felt sick. And that's just, it's a pre-nausea kind of thing. I said, what's happening to me? Oh, that's right. It's the delayed onset of these stressful things. So it's surprising. I mean, I train all the time, and I kind of pride myself on being at least physically prepared for the onset of age-related difficulties, situational difficulties, all of the problems with running a company, those kinds of stress-inducing situations. I've been there before, and I've tried to compensate. And so when this time I said, wait, what's going on here? Oh, yeah, that's right, that delayed onset. Anyways, so today, it's amazing. I had 10 hours sleep last night and slept most of the day. But I'm ready to go to work tomorrow. So you do what you have to do. But this is me, and it's not necessarily the people who are listening. So as the idea of these broadcasts is to inform us what's going on. Why am I experiencing this? And are there any precautions that I can take? And if these things manifest, what do I do? And can I avoid this? Well, unfortunately, you can't avoid it. You can't avoid it. Except experience will teach us to at least get past it. So, Mark Weeks, thank you for your comments. I appreciate it. Yeah, next day accident, I trained with Mark, and Mark and I were working out, and everything went fine. But anyways, stuff happens. So I hope this was helpful. Next Thursday, I'll think of a topic that is pertinent. If all of you have any things that you would like to talk about. Oh, yes. Ruthie says, my cat. Well, animals are one solution to stress. I kid you not. My cat and I are very, very close. She's more like a dog. Actually, she's not my pet. I'm her pet, kind of thing. But animals, dogs and cats are tremendous stress relievers. Just the comfort they sense that, I think, in the people that they are familiar with. So yeah, get a cat, get a dog. That's a good. That's an easy solution. And if you don't like taking a walk, you can you can take them. You can take for a walk. Okay, here we go. Mark says eating helps me reduce stress. Well, actually, that's interesting because the the parasympathetic nervous system can work both ways. Some people's response to stress is to eat more, and that falls in line with the body's requirement with sugar to prepare you for movement. But other people, their appetite is diminished and they don't eat, and that causes a different set of problems. The onset of obesity can result from eating to eliminate stress. The action of eating, number one, is, of course, the calories. So people, this fun food, right? Fun food is usually pretty high in sugar. I know because I like fun food too. But too much of it will, again, cause difficulties. Certainly, it will cause you to be overweight. But there's other things. This is maybe an extreme, but too much sugar. Certainly, new research has come to the conclusion that too much sugar affects memory retention, and of course, obesity, and of course, pre-diabetic. So you got to be careful. Moderation is a good idea, of all things. So be cautious in your approach. Recognize that why these things are happening, and what you should do to alleviate them. Try and choose a healthy remedy. Exercise is a healthy remedy, but too much exercise is the same thing. Too much exercise creates a different kind of physical stress. In the athletic world, a coach like myself imposes stress, physical stress, to force the body to adapt. And the adaptive mechanism is to expand capillary beds and blood vessels to improve oxygen utilization, and also to produce muscular hypertrophy. But that stress is calculated to do that. And too much weight training will cause joint difficulties. Too much aerobic exercise can cause, extremes. You have professional athletes who, die on the playing field. You've seen these in newspapers: soccer players, professional athletes who exercise so much that their heart becomes an athlete's heart, and the pump is disturbed, and they have cardiovascular accidents. So, again, in the physical exercise is a great thing, but you have to clarify exactly what your objective is. Clarify where you are before you begin, what you want to do, and if it's that within the realm of possibility, without creating some serious side effects. So everything requires, I believe, information about what you're doing, whether it's exercise or whether it's diet or whether it's things like stress. Not a lot of people are interested in the science, but I feel that unless you understand the science, you're lost. You won't be able to come up with a reasonable solution to the difficulties that you're encountering. Now, there is a plethora of information on the internet about every aspect that I have talked about tonight. And indulgent in several different aspects of stress: psychological, cognitive, social stress. I cannot address those. I can give you some tips. Try and keep a positive attitude. Do not be concerned about things beyond your control. But it's much deeper than that. So I suggest that you look on the internet for more a total approach to the different types of stress and how to alleviate them. The solutions may not fit your lifestyle, but it's much better than doing nothing. Anyways, Mark, Mark is a flycaster, and that's what reduces his stress. Mark doesn't always seem to have a lot of stress. And of course, Ruthie, I understand, Ruthie. I mean, your son Junsuke must be a lot of stress too. I can understand that. And there's Ashibe-san, who works with me and for me, and I'm sure just working with me is stressful enough for Ashibe-san. But anyways, thank you all for tuning in, and I hope to see you next week, Thursday. Also on Tuesday nights, we have this different topics, and sometimes similar topics in Japanese. And I have Ruthie's son, Junsuke, is tremendously capable of keeping me on course because I tend to digress. Anyways, thank you very much. I hope you have a nice evening, and I'll see you next week. And Mark, I'll see you Saturday for your training session. And Ashibe, I'll see you on the next Zoom meeting. And Ruthie-san, I hope I can see you on next Thursday. Okay, anyways, thank you all for joining in. I'll see you next week. Good night.